Senator Tom Cotton serves the great state of Arkansas. He joins me now. Good morning, Senator Cotton.
Good morning, Hugh. It's good to be back on with you. Good to be on this morning with so many of my fellow veterans and great candidates for Congress and the Senate all across the country. Thanks for having all those folks on.
I want to talk about Rich McCormick and Jen Ruth Green, et cetera, but I want to begin by asking you about a tweet earlier today when Tom Ricks, who you may or may not know, but he's a fine war correspondent, he said, he quoted an article in The Atlantic, quote, "Today's peculiar institution, the modern GOP." And of course, the peculiar institution is slavery. What do you make of that slander?
Well, Hugh, I don't know the context. I haven't seen that particular posting, so I'll refrain from commenting on it because I do have a lot of respect for Tom Ricks' war correspondence, some of the books he's written in the past as well. I will say this, that the folks at The Atlantic seem to have had a nervous breakdown over the last 6 years. Like so many folks in the mainstream media or the Democratic Party, they've just had a break with reality, and it caused them to say the most outlandish things. We've had some of these people in front of our committees, nominees that I worked with somewhat in my first couple years in the Senate. I didn't agree with them on a lot of issues. I thought they were serious national security professionals, and it turns out when you look at their social media accounts during the Trump era, it's like they lost their mind.
I agree with you, and I have asked Tom to please explain because I can't believe he believes that the Republican Party is the moral equivalent of slavery, but we shall see. Senator Cotton, I have been blasting the Joe Biden bailout of degreed professionals. And I mean, you can be an MBA couple about to go to work at Bain or McKinsey or Boston Consulting Group and get a $40,000 check from the government, even as you're about to make $500,000 next year. What do you make of this crazy program?
Well, Hugh, you're not the only one blasting it. Folks all across Arkansas have been blasting this to me for the last week. It's just, first off, plainly unconstitutional. The president doesn't have the power to reassign this debt from people who took it out knowingly to the American taxpayer. The law he cites is really just about specific disputes, in one-off cases, like a lawsuit, for instance. So it is unconstitutional. We should never forget that. I believe courts will strike it down eventually. But second, it is grossly unfair. I thought your column in the Washington Post captured a lot of the stories or vignettes or anecdotes that I've heard from Arkansans. Those who didn't go to college, who went to work and then maybe started a job, built out a landscape business or a pest control business. They aren't going to benefit from this. Young men and women who went to college but worked as a waitress or as a bartender to pay their way through. People who joined the Army for the GI Bill, served overseas for 3, 4, 5 years, and then used the GI Bill to go to school. People who took out loans and repaid those loans, or people whose parents worked hard, maybe worked 2 shifts to save money and scrimp and sacrifice to put their kids through college. No, none of those are going to benefit from this student loan bailout. Finally, I just add there's a strong whiff of corruption here, Hugh. The Washington, D.C. area has some of the highest per capita concentration of student loans in America. So you have a bunch of young liberal staffers who went to expensive schools that then try to be do-gooders in Congress or the Biden White House or left-wing think tanks and activist organizations, and then they're prattling on in the ears of politicians in Washington about how a student loan bailout is the most essential thing in America. When, as you say, you've got families, households that can make up to $250,000 a year, Hugh, $250,000 a year, they're going to get $40,000 of loan forgiveness, which, by the way, because of Congress, is also not going to be treated as taxable income as any other kind of loan forgiveness is. So there's a
Senator,
corruption in the program as well.
I think it's worse than that because I read the Financial Times yesterday on the starting salaries for people who are just about to begin work at the big three, McKinsey, Bain, and the Boston Consulting Group. Each of those people who are about to start will make $250,000 in 2023. Their loans will be forgiven in 2022. So $500,000 can go to a couple of Bain consultants who are married or living together, and they will have $40,000 in debt wiped out. It is the craziest, the most inflationary, but we've heard you say that. Let me move, if I can, to the military vets we're talking to. Rich McCormick in Georgia, Jen Ruth Green in Indiana, Eli Crane in Arizona, Derek Van Orden in Wisconsin. You were kind of the first wave when you ran into Congress as a veteran of the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War. I think this is for the great good benefit of the United States, and I know you got a pack and you're out there helping these people. Do you think that the American electorate cares about service in the uniform when they vote for Congress people?
Yeah, Hugh, very much so. You can tell by the number of veterans who have served in our Congress before, have served in high-ranking positions in our government, and I think increasingly you'll see these veterans winning elections. When I was elected in 2012, I wasn't the first veteran of Afghanistan or Iraq, but we were part of a very early leading edge. I was only 35, which is still a little young for Congress, and certainly young for the Senate in 2014. But over time, I've developed what I call my Veterans to Victories program, where I look in particular at House races. My generation of warriors were probably now in their late 30s to late 40s. That's the time when a lot of people have established themselves in life. Maybe they've run for local office, maybe they've started a business, and they think ways they can do more for their country, and running for the House of Representatives is a good first step. So we've recruited and mentored and supported a lot of great candidates all across the country. Some of those are in Congress and making a big difference, like Matt Gallagher up in Wisconsin, and some of the ones that you just mentioned are going to be outstanding new members of Congress, like Derek Van Orden. I would say that although it's not as common yet in the Senate to have veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan, we have a great advocate for veterans up in Washington State. I know Tiffany Smiley was on your show earlier. Her husband was grievously wounded, and she didn't just help nurse him back to health, but also fought the Army bureaucracy who wanted to retire him because he was blinded in the attack that he suffered. But then also Scotty and Tiffany Smiley have spent much of their time over recent years in Washington advocating for veterans, advocating for improvements in the VA. And Tiffany Smiley will be a great senator for the state of Washington, and she'll not only care for veterans, our troops, but also address so many of the challenges that Washington State has, from crime and drugs and homelessness to rampant inflation. So I've been a big supporter of Tiffany Smiley from the very beginning. I encourage all your listeners to get behind her as well.
Senator Cotton, I also had Morgan Ortegas on this morning, and she's at the border with a group of a dozen candidates. I'm astonished that this is, I know it's a story on Fox News, but a lot of the country is oblivious to what has happened. It's the complete breakdown of any deterrent to crossing into the United States, and that's an incentive for the cartels and the worst human beings on the planet to abuse, rape, disfigure, sell into child slavery, thousands and thousands of children and young women, and America is not doing anything about it.
Well, to be specific, Joe Biden's not doing anything about it, and I think what Americans are about to do about it is repudiate the Democrats at the election. Again, I hear about this routinely across Arkansas. We're not too far from that border, but when you have 2 million illegal aliens crossing the border every year, Hugh, when you have more than 100,000 overdose deaths every year, every state's a border state, and every town is a border town. And I hear it whether I'm in Arkansas, whether I'm in Minnesota, whether I'm in Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, everywhere I go. People are appalled that the Democrats have basically stopped enforcing and protecting our border. In fact, as you say, they are rewarding and encouraging people to cross the border. I remember going to the border last year at the beginning of this surge and speaking to a lot of the migrants and asking them why they were here. And they're often portrayed as people fleeing persecution and violence. Not a single one of them said they had been persecuted because of their religious beliefs or their political views. Not a single one said anything about violence. They all said something like, a better job, I can get in, or just simply Biden. That's why we have this border crisis.
So, Senator, let me turn to the attempt by the Blue Bubble to persuade Blue Bubble people, not just that student loan forgiveness was a good idea. It wasn't. It's a horrible idea. But also that they're not going to get wiped out. They grabbed hold of a special election in New York that they barely won. They tried to turn it into momentum. I saw a raft of stories about how the Democrats are coming back. I don't believe it. I don't believe it for a second. You're out there and you're working for Herschel, J.D. Vance, Blake Masters. You're working for Tiffany Smiley and Joe O'Dea. I know you're making visits all over the country. What do you feel about the election in November?
I think we're going to win, Hugh, but we should not be complacent. The Democrats do have advantages. They have a vast trove of money. They're outspending a lot of our candidates. As you say, they have the liberal media behind them, running interference for them, like a flying wedge on a kickoff in football. What they don't have are results that they can take to the American people. The Democrats and the Democrats are alone responsible for Americans struggling to make ends meet when they fill up at the pump or buy groceries at the grocery store. They're responsible for this crisis at the border that has led to more crime and more drugs in our communities. They're responsible for the surge in crime that you see all across America. In each case, they are making life less rewarding, less safe, less prosperous for normal, hardworking Americans. We can't take that for granted, though. We have to press those points in our campaigns, and we have to explain exactly how the Democrats are responsible and what we'll do to turn things around.
Last question. I think the most easy to understand thing for a voter is that their grocery bill has gone through the ceiling, 13% year over year. What they just did with the student loan forgiveness is going to increase the cost of everything. But it's groceries where the rubber meets the road. Not just gas, that's come down a little bit, but groceries have skyrocketed, Senator Cotton. What do you think candidates ought to lead with?
Well, I think they ought to lead with just a complete breakdown of order and normality in the lives of Americans. And they see it everywhere. They see it at the grocery store every week when they go to the grocery store. They see it when they fill up at the gas pump. They see it when they try to take their kids to a local park and they can't do so because there's drug paraphernalia or homeless vagrants there. They read reports on neighborhood social media or see it in local news of carjackings and home break-ins in broad daylight. All of these things are sad reminders of the total breakdown of the order and normality that normal Americans should be able to expect from their government, but they haven't received it now for a year and a half from the Biden Democrats.
Senator Tom Cotton, thank you for joining me. Follow him on Twitter at Sen, S-E-N, Tom Cotton. Even the Steeler fans can remember that, Sen Tom Cotton. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.